Good to be with you.
Thanks for being with us. Now, John, Brian Mulroney passed away yesterday, as we know. You told me just a while ago that you first met him when you were 15 and became very good friends with him. So do you have any thoughts for us, any anecdotes?
I just think we've lost a real giant. I think the biggest problem we've got in this country is a lack of competent macroeconomic policy. And he really transformed the Canadian economy right from 1984. And, Mr. Chrétien kept those, and Mr. Martin kept those competent macroeconomic policies, and also, obviously, Stephen Harper did. And that really led so much. He was also a big supporter of the mining industry. He was the chair on the board of Barrick for many years, but he was the chair of our International Advisory Board, which I sit in, which I'm a member of. And he'll be really missed. He was a great Canadian. And someone who was really, you need to be, I think, in a country like Canada, we're so small, you need to be transformational in the way you're thinking. And he was not one to just want to move the furniture around. He was thought big.
Is there one story or anecdote or a situation with him that you were a part of that encapsulates what he was like as a person?
He came from, I think it's probably the only prime minister we've ever had who came from a working class background in a small rural mining town, a small rural pulp town in Quebec. And he, rose to become a business leader, a very prominent government leader and statesman around the world. But he always took the time to give young people advice, to give counsel. I remember when I was Minister of the Environment, he gave me a lot of great advice because he was obviously a very, very successful Prime Minister in that regard. And then on foreign policy, he gave a lot, which was, for me, if you had said that to me when I was 15 years old, that I would be having lunch with Brian Mulroney. I was saying I was at a barracks and barrack meetings when I got there the day early, and the phone rang, and it's like, John, it's Brian calling. Do you want to have lunch? And I thought if I was 20 years old and you told me something like that would have ever happened, I would have thought that was about the coolest thing in the world. So for a political nerd, the young political nerds, like he would have been like the Taylor Swift.
Yeah, wow. Amazing. Thank you for that. Let's get to the Canadian resource sector. There are many executives here who are telling us that they've been around a long time, and this is a very challenging market, to put it mildly, maybe the toughest they've ever seen. We hear about a lack of investment, a lack of investor interest. So what's your overall view of the Canadian resource sector and sentiment right now?
I think the challenge is we don't have a government that's prepared to be the champion of the extractive sector, whether that's mining, whether that's oil and gas, with a few exceptions. The permitting takes an extraordinary amount of time, and there's so much uncertainty. I'd rather like a year-long process come back and say no, rather than an 8-year process which comes back and says yes, but here are the 300 conditions, which, so obviously on a prima facie case make it uneconomic to even begin to proceed, let alone. So I think we're all working at cross purposes. This whole big discussion and excitement over electric vehicles, there's no way we're going to make any of these targets or come close to make any of these targets unless we accelerate mining approvals in some of these sectors. And I just don't see the will. You can't try to speed it up. You have to be transformational. I'll give you an example, not in the mining sector, but when we had the global economic downturn, I was responsible for the stimulus, the infrastructure stimulus. And rather than saying every project had to have 2 environmental assessments, we said one project, one environmental assessment, and there was 23,500 projects around the country. After it was all over, we made that policy permanent, and Jack Layton got up in the House and said, "You've destroyed the environment, now you're going to make it permanent." So I said, well, of the 23,500 projects, can you name one where there was a problem? And he said, well, that's not the point. And I said, well, actually, it is the point. And the next day they found one. And would you believe it wasn't a stimulus project and it had 2 full environmental assessments and they still weren't happy? There was a little blading turtle, so they built these little canals underneath highways for the blading turtle. But we've just got to be more transformational in accelerating regulatory consideration, because it's really hurting investment. People just don't think we can get anything done.
Well, I guess the inevitable question, or obvious question, is: does that mean we need I think I may know what the answer is, but do we need a change in government? You did co-chair Mr. Poilievre's campaign a couple of years ago.
Well, obviously, I'm not undecided or neutral on that, and I think that will be the. I worked with Pierre for many years. I was a provincial member of the legislature, and this 24-year-old kid came and ran in my riding federally, and I chaired his first campaign when he was 24, and then co-chaired his leadership campaign 18 months ago. This guy has grown so much over the last 10 years, getting into cabinet, almost losing his seat, getting married, having kids. He had a lot of time to do a lot of thinking, and I think he will return to the competent macroeconomic policies, and I think he will be, the polls indicate that he's doing well, where we don't take anything for granted, but if he can get a majority government, be able to hit the ground running and be transformational on economic growth, and obviously we're going to play to our strengths, and the mining sector is a huge part of the Canadian economy, and it's a huge part of the Canadian economy where many Canadians don't appreciate it. I mean, just within a 5-kilometer radius of where we're meeting today, the amount of jobs in the mining sector, whether it's in financial services, whether it's in legal, accounting, consulting, you name it. And I think he's at a stage, I think, in his life, intellectually, ideologically, that he's motivated to do big things for the country and the economy. So that excites me a lot.
We'll circle back to Canadian politics a little later. So Red Cloud interviewed Pierre Lassonde and Frank Giustra recently based on their opinion editorial in the Globe and Mail, where they were basically saying, complaining about the Canadian pension funds, the Maple 8, not investing enough in the Canadian resource sector, specifically at the junior level. And to use their words, they say it's shameful, it's embarrassing, and that one of the solutions may be a concerted effort at the political level to change that. What's your view on that?
I think you always want to be careful. I think one of the things we've done in this country well is not just especially the federal and provincial public pensions, that they have a huge amount of capital that can be very, very successful. I get obviously nervous when you think of politicians wanting to get their political fingers in metal into those type of decisions. I think you want rate of return for pensioners, especially for something as big as the CPPIB. But perhaps they could be pushed to at least take a better look at it and to step up. So you don't think obviously the Quebec government doesn't have that with the K's and Investing Smart Quebec. It's the exact opposite.
Right. So you don't necessarily believe it's Canada's pension fund's obligation to invest in the mine?
I think they should have an obligation to look at it and to seriously consider it. I just don't want to see politicians get involved in these type of decisions. Next thing, it just because it's something that I like and support. The next thing it'll be some crazy left wing idea on these things. I look at the blowback we're seeing on the ESG. For example, and that's an example.
Right. Now, looking at the macro picture, in 2012, you were quoted as saying that Iran is the biggest threat to peace. So can we argue that nothing has changed? In fact, it's gotten worse?
Yeah, it's. We think Russia is scary. I mean, Russia is basically a gas station with nuclear weapons. Iran, though, is the about probably 85% of the Iranian people or higher don't support the regime. They don't support the mullahs. And Iran is involved in just about causing trouble in just about every single country in the region and even beyond, whether it's their financial and military support for the Houthis, which is already closed down 70% of shipping through the Suez Canal, whether it's their support for Assad and his war against his own people, whether it's their support financially, militarily, trading for Hamas and Hezbollah, Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in South Lebanon, their militias in Iraq and Syria. They've attacked Saudi Arabia. They occupy an Emirati island. They've tried to foment dissent in Bahrain. This is a huge threat. I mean, we are on the verge of an escalating conflict. If there were ever to be a Houthi drone that were to take out a U.S. naval ship in the Red Sea, I think you could see kinetic action directly between the United States and Iran. And Iran only understands one thing, and it's strength. There is a reason that Ronald Reagan, I was a big fan of his. There was a reason why that after 444 days that when Ronald Reagan put his hand on the Bible to be sworn in as president, those hostages were being released at that hour, at that minute. And when Iran sponsored some terrorism, President Reagan took out 30 to 50% of the Iranian Navy. And he was asked at the press conference when he announced it, aren't you worried they're going to respond and attack American installations? And he just looked at the reporter and said, they're not that stupid. And they didn't. And I think they've been getting away with too much, and it just has emboldened them. And this is very, very serious. And imagine if they had nuclear weapons. I mean, we can only go so far in Ukraine because at the end of the day, Putin has a nuclear arsenal. And there's no Politburo, as there was during the Cold War, to be a check on his power and his thinking. I don't think it's out of the question. I wrote a fearmonger, but I don't think it's out of the question that if things were to go badly for Russia, that they could use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. That astounds people. I don't think it's far off. Really, even a 20-25% possibility if things were to start to go badly for Russia. And French President Macron suggested this past week that maybe NATO should be sending in forces to help Ukraine. Well, if we did that, that would escalate the possibility of a tactical nuclear strike. It wouldn't necessarily be World War III, but it could see literally hundreds of thousands of people killed in a moment.
John, just one more question about the Red Sea, and we'll get back to Russia, Ukraine. We were talking beforehand about how we both saw in 60 Minutes a high-ranking U.S. military official saying that the U.S. Navy is more active now than they've been since the Second World War. So can you just flesh out your thoughts a little bit more in terms of the possibility of escalation in that region and what are the solutions? How do you contain it?
Look, I think at some point you've got to stop fighting fires and you've got to start taking away the matches. And at some point you've got to start, they'll have to confront the regime in Tehran. And literally in about 1 hour, you could take out Iran's capacity to export oil by their export terminals. That would not be a complicated military mission, and they've got to be confronted at some point. Otherwise, they're going to just continue to be emboldened. And when you see one of these cheap $50,000 drones that are wreaking havoc, those missile interceptors and the systems are like sometimes $2 to $4 million a shot, and they're not going to be able to. There's not 100% success rating on those. And if one hits a U.S. naval ship, I think this could quickly spiral out of control.
We had, I think it was Rand McEwen on this stage who said that's the goal. They want to sink a ship, a U.S. ship, and then who knows from there.
Well, be careful what you wish for, because I think President Biden has not been strong. Reagan was very strong. Trump was very crazy. And those were both disincentives from taking significant action. But I just don't think they're afraid of President Biden.
John has some interesting ideas about Trump and Biden. We'll get to that in a moment. So in Ukraine, Russia, Zelensky admits that, yes, we're losing ground. Any future aid from the U.S. is bogged out in Congress. Currently, supposedly $60 billion is pending. What are your thoughts?
This is an absolute disgrace. Ronald Reagan must be rolling over in his grave with what the Republican Party is and conservatives in the United States have become. A high-stakes game. I mean, this is costing Ukrainian lives, like hundreds of Ukrainian lives, even thousands potentially every week, because they just simply don't have the ammunition to respond. And Russia is making gains, and Congress has got to pass it, and it'll take a while to get those military shipments there. I applaud NATO stepping up in a big way and the rest, but it's been too little too late. And you're really going to step it up and have it conclude, because I really know this becoming a frozen conflict, much like the two Koreas, and or South Ossetia or Transnistria in Moldova and Georgia, and then Putin wins.
Shifting gears back to our topic, Canada on the world stage. How is, and you've been hinting at it here, but how do you think Canada is viewed right now?
I think it's funny with Brian Mulroney's passing. He was the major Western, he and Canada were the major Western player against apartheid and against in favor of Mandela's release and in favor of sanctions. And we stood in Africa, we stood tall. And history is very kind to Mr. Murray and to Canada because of that. In Africa, I think we're known more for having a prime minister. It may not have been a big issue in Canada, but the black faces were certainly noticed on the African subcontinent. We had a huge fight with Saudi Arabia, which hurt us in the Arab world. We had a huge fight with India. The Prime Minister of India hates Canada. The High Commissioner told me. Obviously, our fight with China, even before Madame Meng, this ridiculous notion of a progressive trade deal with human rights involved. I mean, it was crazy when they tried it with NAFTA. It was even more ridiculous when they sprung it on the Chinese at the last minute. I was at an event last year, and I met the former Prime Minister of Australia, and he was, running down our Prime Minister for a number of reasons. And it takes a lot of work to screw up the Canada-Australia relationship. Like, that you have to get up very, very early. So, one of the things that Prime Minister Harper told me when we were in government, he had no idea how much time he would have to spend on foreign affairs before he became Prime Minister, because there's so many international summits, conferences, the UN, the G7, the G20, APEC, ASEAN, the Commonwealth, I mean, you name it. So it consumes a lot of time and effort. But it really, really matters. We need to be projecting our values and our interests on the global stage. And if we're not doing it, who's going to do it? And that means you have to work with sometimes people you don't always agree with. I mean, honestly, what happened with Khashoggi and with respect to Saudi Arabia was awful. But I can remember meeting with the Saudi king, and I had about 5 or 6 sort of human rights issues I wanted to raise. And I was sat down with that. If I mentioned 5 or 6, he probably won't remember any of them. So I said, I'll just bring out one. And I talked about, rather than hectoring him about the treatment of women by the Saudi government, I sort of said, as a friend of Saudi Arabia, I think you have more room to expand the role of women in Saudi society. I think you need to press it, and here's the benefits you're going to get. X, Y, Z. Well, if you'd said to me 10 years later that the full emancipation of women would be well underway in Saudi Arabia, I wouldn't have believed it. It went so fast that I was worried that there would be, last time I visited the kingdom, I was worried there would be a pushback. But the reforms there are very real, and we need to be at the table there. Even in China, you want to confront Iran globally, you need China's support. You want to get a greenhouse gas deal that's really going to be effective and meaningful, you have to work with China. So I think you need to be a little bit less preachy and try to be more practical.
We've seen a lot of rulers in the Western lands specifically. Why don't they welcome over the years? Thatcher is an example. There are others. Those just get fatigued by them. Is Trudeau at that point now?
Yes. And this is not a nonpartisan thing. Brandon Reed told me this once. He goes, "Why did I win? People were tired of Pierre Trudeau. Why did Chrétien win? People were tired of me." And then you get, it's about a 10-year mark. Trudeau ran was 11 years, and of course he came back. But Mr. Chrétien was 10 years, and his own party took him out, which I thought was disgraceful because I thought he was a very good prime minister. Harper obviously lost in just under 10 years, and I'm sure Trudeau's in his 9th year, so Mr. Mulroney was 9 years. In a liberal democracy, the tide comes in and the tide goes out. And I left provincial politics after 10 years, and I left federal politics after 10 years. Someone gave me some good advice, and they said it's better to go 2 years too early than 2 minutes too late.
Right. My attorney told me we were asked prior to the 2016 election, you predicted that Trump would win, so you're correct on that.
I didn't win. I think with Hillary Clinton, I was a big fan of Hillary's, but I did think he would win.
So we know he's on a direct path to the nomination for the Republicans and perhaps another presidency. So what can Canada do, if anything? What can corporations do, if anything, to prepare for that?
Well, I think there's about a 60% chance that Trump will be reelected. And I've said this for the last year, and some people look at me like I have 3 heads. I do not believe that President Biden will be a candidate. He's clearly suffering cognitive decline. That's not a contestable concept. You just look at him. 76% of Americans, including a majority of Democrats, agree with that. Remember, President Johnson pulled out in March. Senator Kennedy was killed in June. So there is a process for this. But this might surprise people. I think actually Justin Trudeau's biggest accomplishment was confronting Trump in the first 18 months of his presidency. His ambassador, he appointed the co-chair of his campaign to be the ambassador to Washington, an excellent ambassador, David McNaughton. The day after the election, David McNaughton came out and said, we're prepared to renegotiate NAFTA. The business community was aghast. Well, the United States is 10 times bigger than us. They got Trump as president. If they want to renegotiate, they're going to renegotiate it. And Trudeau put one minister responsible, not the trade and the foreign minister. He put Freeland in charge of the relationship and the renegotiations. He got serious. He brought Mulroney in. He brought a number of non-liberals in to work with him. And I think the renegotiation of NAFTA was a great success. We lost. We only lost, but we didn't lose nearly as much as I thought. So I think it's very important is when we should avoid any Trump bashing from the government, especially in the pre-election period. Probably best to be quiet. But we have the 5-year renegotiation of NAFTA that's contained in the renegotiation of NAFTA. So that's going to quickly become a top priority. And Trump is going to be a very different president if he's reelected. He's going to be a lot smarter, and a lot more experienced, and a lot more emboldened. And he had a lot of people around him that tried to keep him in check and to keep him quiet. But he does not. He will not be constrained the way he was in his first term. And second, he will have to face re-election. So he'll be freer to pursue an agenda. And that's something that Canada's got to control. The Prime Minister of Canada, whoever they are, the unity of the countries on their personal shoulder, and the other one is the relationship with the United States. And I think Trudeau dealt with it very, very well to try to be balanced here in the first 18 months. But when he gets up in the House of Commons and said Pierre Trudeau is a MAGA, Pierre Poilievre is a MAGA, wanting to make Canada great again. He's obviously, jabbing Trump, and I would. Even David McNaughton, his election campaign chairman and former ambassador, came out and said that was a bad idea. So I hope he'll listen to that.
So for the Democrats, if it's not Biden and Kamala Harris, are we looking at Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, Hillary? You've also got a rock star waiting in the wings. Do you think that?
I think this is going to be very, very tough. Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California, this guy is a very, very good politician. He had a debate between Ron DeSantis a few months ago, and he made mincemeat of him. He's a very, very good politician. He's very articulate, very smart, very well spoken. But he was mayor of San Francisco. Now he's governor of California, and both of those jurisdictions are going through some really challenging times. The Nancy Pelosi federal office building in San Francisco sent an email out to their staff encouraging them 1 week not to come to work because it was too dangerous when the building was. Like, could you imagine federal government workers in Canada being told not to go to work because it was too dangerous? So that's the thing against. There's the thing for and against him. Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, J.D. Pritzker of Illinois are possibilities, but they're not tested. They won't have gone through the nomination process, which really does test you. And we saw just with the Republicans. There was like 13 or 14 of them, and Ron DeSantis was thought to be the second coming, and he just melted. Didn't even make it to the second primary. Of course, Nikki Haley responded and did quite well. The other, I think Hillary's a possibility. People think I'm crazy, but the other one, and this stuns me. I would never have thought this 12 years ago. Michelle Obama. Her polling numbers are through the roof. She is almost a public intellectual, social icon. She would do speaking tours, and they would sell out hockey arenas with 25,000 people. And that's one. The thing is, unfortunately, she doesn't want to do it. But
right, well, she's on a regular saying, I don't want that life anymore again. So, but it's an intriguing possibility for sure. Okay, let's. Can we get back to the state of play of Canadian politics? Any further thoughts there?
Yeah, one of the things with respect to mining, I talked about internally about regulation and need to transform it to get things done. We also need to be more outward focused. I mean, so many Canadian mining firms operate in foreign jurisdictions, and let me tell you, we need a champion for Canadian mining, either on the international trade side or the foreign affairs side. Whenever I would travel, I would confront government leaders who, loved the Canadian investment when it came in. And Barrick Gold put $3.6 billion into the ground on the mine in the Dominican Republic. They loved it all, but the minute that last dollar went in, all of this this agreement that we have with you just doesn't work for us anymore. Well, they wouldn't pull out with China. They would not pull out with a Chinese mining company. I noticed even the problems in Niger. They're allowing the French mining company to go full speed ahead because France has a special relationship with Niger. So I think we need to be not afraid to be aggressive and vocal and promote Canadian mining companies. Whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the Caribbean, South America, and almost some of the public service, some of the diplomats, and even the trade commissioners think it's almost uncouth to strongly advocate and push for Canadian mining interests, and that's got to stop. When I was Foreign Minister, I took over the grants and contributions programs. We were actually funding anti-mining activists in foreign countries that were lobbying against Canadian mining interests. And there was one where we were funding First Nation groups to go down there and teach their Indigenous people how to oppose mining. Part of me thought maybe we should allow it and fund it because at least they would stop opposing mining in Canada. But we did stop that sort of ridiculous funding. Where actually Canadian mining companies were paying taxes, and those taxes were being used to fund the opposition in X, Y, and Z country. And that ridiculous stuff has just got to stop.
Last question for you, John, before we get to some Q&A. And I think this may sort of encapsulate what it says about you as a younger man and the trajectory that you were on. It's 1988. You're a student at Queen's. You're arrested for trespassing at a mall because you tried to speak to Ontario Premier at the time, David Peterson, about free trade. Could you tell us about that?
I'm 19 years old. I am handing out copies of the Globe and Mail editorial board, going after Liberals for lying about free trade. And David Peterson was coming. I was president of the Ontario Young Conservatives, and David Peterson was coming to town with this local unknown candidate in Kingston when I went to Queen's. And I was protesting, and I was really, I wanted to make sure I got to Peterson and gave him the flyer that I was putting out and tried to confront him. Well, his security detail was going to have none of that, and they tried to get me to leave, and I wouldn't, so I got arrested. So I fought my trial. It was a $53.75 fine, not a criminal offense, but a non-indictable offense. So I fought it. I had a raw student be my lawyer, who later on went on to be Prime Minister Harper's chief of staff. I subpoenaed both David Peterson and this unknown Liberal candidate to my trial. The unknown Liberal candidate, Peter Milliken, who was Speaker of the House of Commons later, had parliamentary immunity, but David Peterson didn't. And so 8 hours after we served him, they dropped all the charges. And then it's funny what a small country Canada is. I became an MP years later, and I voted for Peter Milliken to be Speaker on every ballot in both 2006 and 2008. And a few years ago, David Peterson was my nominator to be a member of the Toronto Club.